She married her bodyguard to survive her father's killers, pregnant, hunted, and alone. But when secrets buried in bloodlines resurface, the man sworn to protect her may be hiding the truth that could destroy them both. Did she marry a savior, or the last man she should have trusted? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. Isabella Moretti stood at the edge of her father's marble balcony, the breeze heavy with salt from the Ligurian Sea below. But there was no peace in the crashing waves, no comfort in the scent of home. Her hands rested over her stomach, the silk of her mourning dress pulled tight by the small swell that had begun to show. 5 weeks pregnant, and completely alone. Her father, Donato Moretti, the most feared financier in northern Italy, had been dead for just 10 days. They said it was a stroke, but Isabella had seen the look in the coroner's eyes. She'd heard the hushed voices in the hallway. Too young, too healthy, too sudden. And now the vultures were circling, men who had smiled at Donato's table, toasting champagne, pretending loyalty. Family members she hadn't seen since childhood were calling lawyers and bankers. She knew what they were after, not the house, not the title. The inheritance, and the unborn heir to it. The estate was held in trust. Without a husband, she had no legal control until the child was born. But if she married, everything shifted. Legally, she'd be granted full control over the estate, and the power to protect her unborn child from the wall already unfolding behind gilded walls. That's why she called him Marcus Kane. He entered silently, dressed in the black-on-glass uniform he always wore. Broad shoulders, clean lines, expression unreadable. He had worked for her father for 7 years, head of security, ex-military, decorated but emotionally impenetrable. Isabella had always admired his discipline, but now, as the sun set behind him and her future hung by a thread, she felt something shift. She turned to face him fully. "They tried to kill me this morning." Marcus didn't flinch. "I know, I have the footage. It was a gunman outside the clinic. If I hadn't parked in the back alley, you did exactly what I taught you. That saved your life." "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling, "they're not going to stop." His jaw clenched. "Then I won't stop either." She stepped closer. "That's not enough anymore." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, curiosity or warning. "I need more than a guard. I need protection, legal protection, financial control. I need a shield strong enough that no one questions my authority while I carry this child." "You want me to track the shooters? I'm already doing that." "Are you want to marry me?" The room fell into silence. Even the sea seemed to. Marcus stared at her, unreadable. "Isabella, isn't a proposal of love," she said quickly. "It's survival. The trust gives full control to the husband until the child is born. After that, I'll dissolve it. You'll walk away with a payout, safe, clean, no complications. Deal you? You're asking me to enter a legal marriage." "I'm asking you to save my life." Marcus turned away, one hand dragging through his hair. "You don't know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." She took another step toward him, closer than they'd ever stood before. "You've been loyal to this family longer than most of my relatives. I trust you. I only trust you." His voice was low. "You think a ring changes the threats we're facing?" "No, but it changes the balance of power. It stops the board from trying to remove me. It keeps the press from tearing us apart. And it sends a message: the heir to Morales Enterprises is protected by someone dangerous." A beat passed between them. "You are dangerous, aren't you, Marcus?" His lips twitched for the first time. "That's why your father hired me." Another silence, heavier this time. Isabella's breath hitched. "Then say yes." Marcus didn't speak. He stepped toward her instead, 1 step, then 2, until his breath was inches from hers. "I'll say yes," he murmured, "on one condition." She blinked. "You do exactly what I say, every moment, every move, no exceptions." Isabella nodded, too quickly. "Agreed." He extended his hand, not to shake, but to seal something deeper. She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, and somehow final. 3 days later, they stood in front of a judge, inside a private courtroom in the city. No guests, no ceremony, no vows, just a stack of documents, a quietly trembling clock, and a pen that trembled in Isabella's hand before she signed her name. Isabella Moretti Kane. When Marcus signed, his fingers didn't shake. Not even a little. Afterward, she turned to him. "Doesn't this feel surreal?" Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he scanned the hallway for threats before walking her to the armored SUV. Inside the vehicle, Isabella folded her hands in her lap. "You haven't asked me about the baby." "I don't need to," he said quietly. "Because you're still alive. That tells me everything." They didn't speak for the rest of the ride. That night, she lay in the guest room of her own villa, now technically theirs, and stared at the ceiling. She thought about her father, about the boardroom power plays that had replaced family dinners, about the quiet way Marcus had always watched from the shadows. And now he was her husband, at least on paper. But in her bones, she knew something had changed. The air between them was charged differently now, not warm, not soft, but not cold either. Purpose. The kind of connection born in storms, not songs. And Isabella Moretti had lived through enough storms to know when one was coming. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed, was that Marcus had once loved someone and lost her in a war that left scars deeper than any file could document. That night, Marcus stood outside her bedroom door, hand resting near his holster, listening for anything, everything. She was safe now, but safety had a cost. And soon, they'd both discover that the real danger wasn't coming from outside the gates. It was already living under their roof. And it had Moretti blood, too. The wedding took place in a quiet room inside the Moretti estate's chapel. No guests, no photographers, no celebration. Only a priest, a pair of rings, and the chilling weight of necessity hung in the air. Isabella Moretti stood tall in an ivory suit that concealed the slight curve of her pregnancy. Marcus Kane stood beside her in his black suit, looking like a shadow cut from stone. His jaw was set, his gray eyes unreadable. When the priest asked if she took this man to be her lawfully wedded husband, Isabella answered without hesitation, "I do." Marcus paused, just for a second, then he followed, "I do." The vows were sealed with signatures, instead of kisses. Isabella slipped the ring onto his finger with trembling hands, and he did the same without flinching. They were bound now, by law, by protection, by blood not yet born. When the priest closed his Bible and stepped back, silence echoed louder than church bells ever could. Afterward, Marcus didn't look at her. He opened the chapel door and gestured wordlessly for her to go first. She nodded, brushing past him with her head held high. Outside, the media waited like vultures. Despite her efforts to keep the marriage secret, news had leaked. Camera flashes exploded as they stepped into the daylight. "Isabella, who's the groom? Is he the father? Why the sudden wedding?" Marcus shielded her with his body, clearing a path to the car with firm authority. Isabella kept her chin lifted, her face frozen in the practiced smile of someone raised in the spotlight but raised with secrets. Inside the limousine, she slumped into the leather seat, her hands resting over her stomach protectively. "You'll only dig deeper now," she said, not looking at him. "I know," Marcus replied. Back at the estate, she retreated to her room while he disappeared into the security wing. Days passed in a blur of scandal. News outlets speculated about the mysterious new husband. Tabloids questioned the paternity of the unborn child. Old rivals came sniffing around with fake smiles and hidden threats. Inside the mansion, Isabella wandered like a ghost, alone in her own fortress. Marcus, meanwhile, buried himself in duty. He installed new surveillance systems, replaced staff with hand-picked personnel, and scrutinized every inch of the estate's perimeter. He said little, only speaking when necessary. His presence was constant but emotionally absent. At night, Isabella found herself pacing in the hallway, sleep elusive. The mansion was too quiet, too heavy with things unsaid. She avoided Marcus during the day, unsure how to speak to the man who had become her husband but remained a stranger. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him checking a lock, reading reports, walking with precise control, but their eyes rarely met. And yet one night, it changed. She woke from a nightmare, gasping for breath, her skin clammy with sweat, her heart pounding. The dream was the same, her father's face, a scream, a hand reaching for her as shadows closed in. She sat up in bed, trembling. A sound. Soft footsteps, her door opened slightly, and there stood Marcus. "I heard you," he said. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat was tight. He stepped in slowly, not touching anything, not coming too close, just standing there like an anchor in the storm. "I'm fine," she managed to whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the chair by the window and sat down, facing the door. "You can go back to sleep," he said. "I'll stay." She stared at him. His voice was calm, even, but something in it cracked the wall around her heart. She lay back down, unsure why she felt safer now. He didn't speak again, didn't move, just sat there, watching over her like some unspoken promise. She slept. Flashbacks haunted her dreams that night, only this time they softened. She saw herself as a girl in a silk dress, standing at the top of a grand staircase. Her father, Vincent Moretti, was hosting another gala. Men with wine and women with secrets floated around her like fog. Isabella remembered clinging to the banister, hating the noise. Her father had crouched down beside her then, his cologne strong and his voice firm. "You'll rule all this," he said, "but not with softness, Isa, only the cold survive." He'd taught her to be clever, to be quiet, to never show fear. But he hadn't taught her how to ask for help, or how to trust. In the morning, when she opened her eyes, Marcus was still there, sitting, silent. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once. That morning, something shifted. Not much, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to begin watching him differently. In the days that followed, Marcus continued his work, but now Isabella noticed the quiet way he softened his voice when speaking to her. The way he paused to ask if she was comfortable. The way his eyes lingered a moment longer than necessary before looking away. She began leaving her door open a crack at night, just in case. She no longer flinched when his fingers brushed her passing documents. She began speaking more during their brief interactions, commenting on the weather, asking questions about security, and once even joking dryly about the tabloids calling him the mysterious bodyguard groom. He'd almost smiled. One afternoon, she passed the security room and paused. Through the window, he saw him watching multiple monitors at once, his focus intense. But in the corner of the desk, she saw something unexpected, a photo of her, taken during her father's funeral. She was standing alone, her head bowed. She remembered the moment. She thought no one had been looking at her. That night, she stood at his office door and knocked. He looked up, surprised. "I couldn't sleep," she said. He stood and motioned to the chair across from him. They didn't talk much, just that, but this time, silence wasn't cold. It was something else, shared. A kind of fragile peace formed between them, like the first thaw of winter, unsure but undeniable. Still, questions gnawed at her, about her father's death, about the men who had tried to kill her, about what Marcus really knew. But for now, she let it go. Because for the first time since that terrible night, she didn't feel alone. And maybe, just maybe, neither did he. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy drapes of the Moretti estate, but it brought little warmth. Isabella sat at the window seat in her private sitting room, watching the mist swirl over the distant hills. She clutched a silver locket that had once belonged to her father. Since his death, everything had changed. Her world, her freedom, her future. But the one thing that gnawed at her more than grief was doubt. Doubt that his passing had been natural. Marcus entered the room without a sound, dressed in dark slacks and a fitted black shirt, his presence as quiet and solid as ever. "We need to talk," he said simply. Isabella turned. "About what?" He handed her a file. "Security footage from the estate the night your father died. Parts of it have been erased." Her heart skipped. "Erased?" He nodded grimly. "Someone with access. Someone from the inside." Her hands trembled as she opened the folder. Images, timestamps and logs stared back at her. She knew every corner of this estate. There were gaps. Exactly when the paramedics were called, her voice faltered. "You think he was murdered?" "I think we've been blind," Marcus said, his voice low, "and someone wants it to stay that way." That evening, whispers echoed through the grand halls as servants exchanged glances. The once loyal staff now seemed like shadows, nervous others too. Still, Marcus had increased surveillance, but even he couldn't be everywhere. Then came the moment that twisted the knife. Isabella stepped out into the corridor outside the estate's small library and heard Marcus's voice, soft, unguarded, speaking into a phone. "I'm doing what I can. She's not safe," he murmured. A woman's voice responded on speaker. "But you can't protect her forever, Marcus. What happens when she finds out?" Isabella froze, her breath caught. She pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding. Who was the woman? What did she mean when she finds out? The jealousy hit before the fear, sharp and unfamiliar. She hated herself for feeling it. But worse than that, she hated the sick uncertainty curling in her gut. That night, Isabella returned to her room only to find her bed turned down and a small envelope sitting on her pillow. Her name was scrawled across it in red ink. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a single sentence: "You married the wrong man. You'll both pay." The words made her throat go dry. She stumbled backward and sat down, breath shallow. The ink wasn't printed. It was handwritten. Someone had been in her room. She called Marcus immediately. He arrived in seconds, scanning the room with the precision of a soldier. "No one entered through the cameras," he said. "They knew where the blind spots were." Isabella handed him the note. This is why you married me, isn't it? To play bodyguard, not because you believed in me." Marcus's jaw tensed, his eyes scanning the threat. "I married you because you asked me to." "That's not an answer." He looked at her then, really looked at her. His voice was low, controlled, but something in his gaze flickered. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you, like he did." The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat. For a moment, her grief and fear melted into something else entirely. Something warmer, quieter, but just as overwhelming. She looked down, unable to hold his gaze. "Didn't you say anything before?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Marcus looked away. "Because I'm not the kind of man who says things he doesn't understand yet. And I didn't want to say something just to keep you from walking away. You deserved more than a shield. You still do." The note still lay between them, on the bed, like a curse. But in that moment, it felt smaller somehow. Less powerful than the weight of what Marcus had just admitted, even if only partially. That night, Isabella barely slept. The threat, the woman's voice, the erased footage, all of it ran in loops through her mind. But Marcus's words haunted her the most. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of losing you like he did." In the morning, she rose early and wandered the estate alone. Her father's old greenhouse, now abandoned, drew her in. The scent of dried herbs and dead roses lingered in the air. As she traced her fingers along a dusty gardening table, she remembered how he used to bring her here after long board meetings. He hated the boardroom, she whispered to herself, but he loved the earth. Her father had always seemed invincible, larger than life, until the day he collapsed at that very boardroom table. They'd said it was a stroke. But the inconsistencies Marcus had uncovered, the erased footage, the sudden change in staff loyalty, it all felt wrong now. A rustling noise behind her snapped Isabella out of her thoughts. She turned, alert. It was Marcus. "I thought I'd find you here," he said softly. Isabella nodded. This place still remembers him, even if no one else does. Marcus stepped closer. I remember. She looked up at him. Then help me find out who killed him. Not just to protect me or the estate, but for him. He nodded. We will. Later that day, Isabella made the difficult decision to let go of 2 senior staff members. Individuals Marcus had flagged as suspicious. It caused a stir, with rumors swirling across social media about her being unstable, paranoid, or worse. Tabloids latched on quickly. Heiress on edge, married bodyguard now pulling the strings. Marcus advised her to stay off the internet, but Isabella refused. Let them write what they want. I'm not hiding anymore. But that resolve was tested again just days later when she overheard another hushed conversation, this time between 2 junior staff members in the West Corridor. Say she's pregnant and paranoid, one whispered, and he's the one really calling the shots. Didn't you hear? The last heiress who stood up to the board vanished, the other said, laughing nervously. Isabella turned the corner and the 2 froze. She said nothing, only stared. They scurried off, their faces pale. At night, after locking every window and door in her wing, Isabella sat alone in her study. The envelope from earlier was in her lap. She turned it over again and again, studying every letter. Then she noticed something, an indentation in the paper. She held it to the light. A partial fingerprint. The next morning she brought it to Marcus. He raised an eyebrow. You think this could lead us somewhere? He asked. She nodded. It has to. They didn't speak of the other woman again, or what she had overheard, but Isabella watched Marcus closely now. Not with suspicion, but with a kind of quiet longing she wasn't ready to admit. He hadn't lied to her, but he hadn't told her everything either. And now, with new threats rising and the truth still buried, Isabella knew one thing for certain. She couldn't afford to lose him, not to enemies, not to silence, and not to fear. As dusk fell over the estate once more, she stepped into the courtyard where Marcus stood reviewing blueprints with the security team. She waited until the others left, then asked him quietly, "Why did you really say yes? That night I asked you to marry me." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, the last rays of sunlight casting sharp angles across his face. His voice was even, but it cracked at the edges. "Because when I saw you bleeding and shaking after that ambush, I realized I'd rather die beside you than live without you." Isabella blinked back sudden tears. And for the first time in weeks, despite the threats and shadows, she felt safe. Not because of walls or guards or locked doors, but because Marcus Kane, quiet, scarred, unreadable Marcus, had finally told her the truth. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough. The storm hit just after midnight. Rain pounded the estate's wide windows like impatient filts, and thunder rolled like the echo of unfinished business. Isabella had barely settled into a restless sleep when the security alarm pierced the night. Before she could move, Marcus was already at the door, firearm in hand, his face carved with sharp focus. Gunfire cracked in the dark beyond the courtyard. By the time the dust cleared and the would-be intruder was subdued, Marcus lay against the front steps, his shoulders slick with blood. Isabella dropped to her knees beside him, panic stealing her breath. "You're hurt," she gasped. "We've had worse," Marcus muttered, even as his eyes lost focus. "No, you're not doing this alone." She refused to let the staff call an ambulance. "He stays here. I'll care for him myself," she ordered. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from a raw mix of fury and protectiveness. For the first time since her father's death, Isabella felt something beyond grief and survival, something painfully human. In the days that followed, she nursed Marcus in the guest room near her own. She changed his bandages, cooked his meals, even read aloud from the old books in her father's study. The man who had always stood silent and stoic before her now winced when he sat up and blinked slowly at her gentle touch. "Told you I was fine," he grumbled one morning as she fluffed his pillows. "You're a terrible liar," she replied, not unkindly. One rainy afternoon, Isabella brought a bowl of soup and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence between them, once heavy, now felt like a shared blanket, warm and alive. "Do you remember the old vineyard near the lake?" she asked suddenly. Marcus nodded. "Your father used to hold his summer meetings there. I ran security. I was 7. I used to hide under the tables and eat grapes until I got sick." She chuckled softly, then looked down at her hands. That was the last summer. He smiled like he meant it. There was a pause. Then Marcus said, "I grew up in a trailer on the outskirts of Reno. My mom was a waitress. I only saw my father once." Isabella turned to him, surprised. "Her name was Ruth," he continued. "She gave me a Swiss Army knife when I turned 10. I still have it." Their shared stories opened a door that had been locked for too long. By the time the light faded from the sky, they had spoken more than they had in all the days since their strange marriage began. Later that evening, Isabella walked into Marcus's room to check on his wound. He had fallen asleep with a book open on his chest. She stood by the door for a long moment, watching the lines of his face soften in slumber. Then, almost against her own better judgment, she stepped inside, sat beside him on the couch, and leaned her head back, her body heavy with exhaustion. "I'm scared," she whispered into the quiet. "What if I'm not ready for this baby? What if I lose it too?" Marcus stirred but didn't wake. She continued, her voice lower now. "Everyone I've ever loved has disappeared. My father, my mother, and now I'm bringing a life into this chaos." Marcus woke hours later, finding Isabella still curled up beside him, her face turned slightly toward his, her breathing soft and even. A piece of hair had fallen across her cheek, and without thinking, he reached up to gently tuck it behind her ear. His fingers lingered for a second longer than they should have. She stirred and blinked awake. "You should be resting," she murmured. "I was," he replied. "You too." They looked at each other for a long moment. Then Isabella whispered, "Why did you really agree to marry me?" Marcus sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "Because you needed protection, and because I gave my word to your father." She frowned. "He made you promise?" "In a way. He didn't trust many people, but he trusted me with you. He knew there'd be blood after he died." She stared at him, searching his expression. "That can't be the only reason." Marcus lowered his eyes. "I didn't want to lose you." The words hung between them, unfinished and charged with meaning. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. A maid entered quietly, holding a phone. "It's the estate lawyer. He says it's urgent." Isabella rose, smoothing her sweater. "I'll take it in the study." She glanced back once before leaving. Marcus exhaled as the door clicked shut. That night, Marcus returned to his own room, his wound now healing better than expected. Still, sleep evaded him. He found himself walking the halls, checking locks, listening to creaks in the floorboards. When he passed by the nursery Isabella had started to prepare, he paused. Inside, soft lighting glowed. He pushed the door open. The room was a delicate, white lace curtains, pale yellow walls, and a plush rocking chair by the window. On the dresser was a framed photo of Isabella as a child, held in her father's arms. The man who had built an empire and made more enemies than allies, but who clearly adored his daughter. Marcus stepped closer and stared at the photo. "I won't fail her," he whispered. The next morning, as the staff bustled around the estate, Isabella found Marcus outside repairing a broken fence. He was shirtless despite the chill, his shoulders still bruised but strong. "You should rest," she called. "I will. Just wanted to get this fixed. Security weakness." She crossed her arms, smiling slightly. "Always the protector." He didn't look up. Old habits. Later that evening, as a storm rolled in once again, Marcus brought in firewood and found Isabella sitting by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. Without asking, he sat beside her. "I had a dream last night," she said softly. "I was in labor, but no one came. I kept calling out for help, and the house was empty." He looked at her, his voice gentle. "That's not going to happen." "I wanted someone to be there, someone who'd choose me, not just protect me, someone who'd stay." Marcus hesitated. "You've always had that, you just didn't see it." The fire crackled between them. Slowly, Isabella leaned her head against his good shoulder. He didn't move. They fell asleep like that, curled close on the couch as the storm howled outside. The envelope lay unopened on the mahogany desk, its seal bearing the insignia of the estate's legal counsel. Isabella stared at it, frozen. Beside her, Marcus stood with quiet resolve, his arms folded tightly, jaw set. The air between them was sharp with unspoken fears. She tore it open. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the DNA test results, confirming what the whispers had hinted. Her unborn child was not just an heir to her father's fortune. It was now the primary heir to a vast, unsuspected holding. A forgotten clause in her grandfather's will named any direct biological descendant as inheritor of controlling shares in Moretti Holdings, should the patriarch pass without a clear successor. "This changes everything," Isabella whispered, eyes scanning the paper. "It makes you a bigger target," Marcus replied, his voice a low rumble. "And the child. The estate, the power, the legacy, it wasn't just hers anymore. Her baby was now the key, and that meant the vultures circling her wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, or destroyed her trying." Marcus spent the next 2 days investigating deeper into the tangled net of the family business. Every file he accessed unearthed something more sinister. He tracked unusual wire transfers, flagged calls routed through dummy accounts, and traced surveillance breaches inside the Moretti mansion's encrypted logs. The red string led to one name, Sebastian Moretti, her cousin. Isabella had always regarded Sebastian as a harmless nuisance, a playboy with a flair for drama and a thirst for relevance. But now the pieces fit too perfectly. Sebastian, hungry for control, had everything to gain by destabilizing her. And with her baby now legally in line to rule the empire, Sebastian had everything to lose if she survived. Marcus entered the study that evening, his face grim. "Your cousin's not just ambitious, he's desperate." She turned to face him, her body tense. "What do you mean?" "I intercepted a message," he said, placing a flash drive on the table. "He's hired someone on the inside. A mole." The blood drained from her face. "Someone here? In this house?" Marcus nodded once. "I've narrowed it down to 3 staff members. I need your permission to confront them." She didn't hesitate. "Do it." That night, Marcus summoned the 3 to the West Wing security room. Under dim lights, with a stoic intensity that made all 3 squirm, he interrogated them one by one. 2 were cleared quickly. The third, Thomas, the new groundskeeper. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he cried. "They said to report where she went, who she talked to, what security she had, nothing else." "Who paid you?" Marcus demanded. Thomas hesitated. "A man said he worked for Mr. Moretti." "Not you, the other one." Isabella, standing behind the two-way mirror, gasped. Later, as the man was restrained for authorities, she watched him with betrayal seeping through her like ice. She stepped back from the glass, heart pounding. Every smile Thomas had offered, every helpful gesture, now felt like lies. "I trusted him," she whispered. Marcus approached her slowly. "This won't be the last attempt, but it will be the last time someone gets that close." Back in the study, as the adrenaline ebbed, she sank into the leather chair opposite him. "You keep saving me. What happens if one day you don't?" His expression flickered. "Then I'll make sure someone else does, but I don't plan on failing again." His words lingered. The next morning, Isabella received another document, one not from a lawyer, but from Marcus himself. It was a detailed timeline of private protection efforts, dating back to her teenage years. Photographs, logs, even letters. He had watched over her longer than she realized. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, voice cracking. Marcus looked away. "Because you never needed to know. Back then, I was just a name buried in reports. But when your father died, I couldn't be just a name anymore." Isabella's breath caught. All those years she thought she'd been alone, grieving, vulnerable, paranoid. He had been there, quietly, flashed constantly. It was the first time she truly saw him, not just as her protector or husband by dawn, but as a man who had seen her worst nights, shielded her from threats she never knew, and never once asked for anything in return. Later that evening, they walked the edge of the estate gardens under moonlight. The air was cool and thick with the scent of night jasmine. Marcus carried a silent weight in every step, but Isabella noticed something different. Something gentler in the way he held her elbow as they crossed uneven ground. "You say yes," she asked suddenly, "to the marriage. You never answered me." He paused, "Because saying no would have meant letting you face this alone." "That's duty," she replied. He turned to her, eyes darker than the sky above them. "It started as duty. It isn't anymore." They didn't speak for a long time after that, but they didn't walk apart either. That night, a storm thundered outside. Isabella lay awake, thoughts tumbling in spirals, memories of her father's lectures, of her cousin's jealousy, of the staff she trusted and the ones she shouldn't have. But one image stayed fixed in her mind. Marcus, holding that flash drive, eyes burning with silent fury on her behalf. She imagined a future that felt impossible only weeks ago. A future where her child could run through this estate freely, laugh in safety, live without fear. And in that imagined world, Marcus was always there. In the soft lamplight of her bedroom, Isabella reached for her phone and opened a new note. She didn't write anything, she just stared at the blinking cursor, wondering what kind of message she'd leave if tonight were her last. She thought about the child inside her, the legacy growing beside her grief. And she thought about Marcus, not the bodyguard, not the reluctant husband, but the man whose quiet devotion had never once wavered. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel alone. The storm that had chased them inside finally broke, dark clouds folding over the estate like a protective shroud. With every thunderclap, the mansion trembled, its stone walls vibrating with echoed tension. The staff had been ordered onto lockdown, no one in or out until the storm passed, leaving Isabella and Marcus alone, confined in the oldest wing of the house. Silence pressurized the corridors until even the distant ticking of the grandfather clock sounded sharp in the emptiness. They found themselves in the drawing room, once a grand social hall, now a quiet stage for their fraught emotions. Isabella had retrieved a decanter of red wine earlier, and with nothing else to occupy her, she poured 2 glasses. She set one before Marcus, who accepted it wordlessly, standing rigid and altogether tense in each breath. Isabella watched him sip slowly, trying to read his face in the dim lamplight. His strong jaw tightened, shoulders braced. For weeks, she'd leaned on his restraint, his solid composure. But tonight, with the storm outside and no escape in sight, the walls they built around each other began to crack. She spoke first. "Why do we pretend none of this means anything?" Her voice was raw. He set down the glass with deliberate calm and faced her fully. "Pretend?" he echoed, voice low. "You think I can pretend?" She swallowed hard. "You're hard to read. You do your job, you keep me safe, but where do you fit in this?" Her hand swept across her chest, in a gesture that encompassed her body, her baby, her bruised heart. Marcus took a measured step forward, the distance closing. "I don't pretend at all," he paused. "What I feel, it's real." He didn't define it, he didn't explain it, but in the unwavering stillness of his stance, carved from conviction, she heard the confession, louder than words. Thunder rolled outside, rattling the window panes. Isabella's breath caught. The music of the storm wove itself around them, intensifying the moment, like the universe itself held its breath with them. She spoke in a whisper, more to herself than him. "I'm scared." The tremor in her voice was enough to break his restraint. Marcus's hand hovered, uncertain, decades of duty and professionalism warring with a yearning he finally couldn't hide. His fingertips brushed her cheek, light, respectful, then traveled along her jawline, the suppressed hunger of weeks of tension shaking through that single contact. Isabella closed her eyes, leaning into him, the barrel of her spine hollowing, exposed and yearning. "Marcus?" He closed the remaining distance, their lips met in a rush of restraint unsheathed. The first kiss was gentle, tentative, their lips pressing as if in silent acknowledgement of everything left unsaid. She felt the taste of his wine at his tongue, the steady thrum of his heartbeat echoing her own. In that moment, every apology for their emotional distance, every tear, every flash of danger and heartbreak that had brought them here, crystallized and released between them. The kiss deepened. He gently lifted her, drew her closer still, arms wrapping around her waist, her hands sliding up his arms. Each breath they shared composed an anthem of unspoken longing and relief. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads rested together. Isabella's eyes brimmed. She whispered, "I'm not strong enough to survive without you, but I'm not sure I deserve this." Her hand drifted from his arm, falling away, tears escaping. Marcus closed his eyes, guilt flickering in his gaze. "I won't ever stop protecting you." He tried to hold her gaze, but she pulled back. Without another word, Isabella turned, slipping away. He watched her retreat, the echo of her steps amplified by the stillness. He did not follow, not immediately. He understood. In the rubble of her past, trust had to regrow slowly. Pulse by pulse, breath by breath. He placed a quiet hand on the kitchen doorframe, looking out into the corridor she'd vanished into. He hadn't chased her, not out of coldness, but respect. The storm-laced end of this fervor needed time to breathe. Outside, the rain finally slackened, the thunder dispersing into distant murmurs, an echo of the tensions still vibrating between them. Marcus sat alone in the drawing room, hands folded in his lap, the wine glass long forgotten. He closed his eyes. He had broken through one barrier, but love, after betrayal, after grief, would require more than passion. It would demand patience, and so he waited. When dawn crept across the estate, casting gentle, pale light down the corridors, Isabella moved carefully through the drawing room again. The storm had passed, leaving only the faint odor of rain and renewal. She paused at the threshold to find the wine glass and a folded note. No ink spilled, just smooth paper. She unfolded the note. In neat, precise handwriting, "I'll wait. Because you are worth it." She exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The air was heavy inside the Moretti estate as a courier arrived bearing a weathered envelope marked with the estate's ancient seal. Isabella sat across from the family attorney, her fingers trembling as she broke the wax and unfolded the document. It was another will dated just days before her father's death. She scanned the pages, her breath catching in her throat. According to the document, she had been designated not only as sole heir, but as full legal controller of the Moretti business empire, bypassing the board and negating the temporary power her cousin Matteo had assumed in her absence. Her father had left it all to her. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Why was this hidden? A lawyer shifted. It was discovered in a private vault, one your cousin did not disclose. The betrayal struck her harder than she expected. Matteo had fought her since the beginning. Now she realized he had been hiding more than just ambition. He'd been orchestrating her downfall from the shadows, hoping to erase her before she discovered the truth. That same night, Matteo made his move. He called a press conference without warning and stood before the cameras, holding up a forged DNA report. "My cousin Isabella is lying," he announced. "The child she carries is not of Marie blood. This is an attempt to steal what was never hers." The lie cut deep, more than any threat. Isabella watched the broadcast in silence. At her sides, fury and fear tangled in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her unborn child's legacy. Marcus stood nearby, silent but steady. Later that night, he approached her in the study, eyes unreadable. "I can step back," he said. "If it protects your name, your family's future, I'll walk away." The offer shattered something inside her. "You think I want you gone?" He didn't answer. Isabella stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Do you really think I'd rather stand alone than stand beside the only man who's ever protected me without expecting something in return?" Marcus looked down, jaw tight. "It's not about what you want. It's about what you'll lose if you keep me." She stared at him for a long time. Then she turned and walked out. Not because she agreed, but because she needed time to decide how to fight this war without losing her heart in the process. The next morning, the world woke to Isabella Moretti standing on the steps of her family's headquarters, microphones pointed at her from every direction. She didn't flinch. "I have remained silent for too long," she began, her voice clear and powerful. "Not because I was hiding anything, but because I believed dignity mattered more than drama." The crowd leaned in. "But today, lies have been spread about me, about my child, and about the man who risked everything to keep me alive." She held up the will. "This was signed by my father days before his death. It names me as his successor, without conditions. And this man, Marcus Kane, is not my bodyguard. He is my husband, my protector, and the only person in this house I trust." Gasps rippled through the reporters. Cameras flashed. Across town, Matteo watched from a luxury penthouse, a wine glass slipping from his hand. Isabella's words had landed like a dagger, sharp, public, and irreversible. But she wasn't finished yet. "This child I carry," Isabella continued, her hand resting gently on her stomach, "is the last of the Moretti bloodline, and I will protect them, not just with lawyers or security, but with the truth." She stepped away from the podium, her heart pounding, tears stinging the corners of her eyes. Behind her, Marcus was waiting, not like a shield anymore, but like a partner. Inside the estate, the atmosphere was transformed. For the first time in weeks, the whispers weren't about her shame, but her strength. The public response was swift and furious. Matteo's fabricated report was exposed as a forgery within hours. A whistleblower from the lab came forward, confessing, under pressure, that he'd been paid off. The press turned against Matteo with a vengeance. By the end of the week, his assets were frozen, his shares revoked. And Isabella? She was everywhere. News outlets hailed her as a new face of female leadership. Business analysts marveled at her composure. And inside the estate, the staff, once cold and distant, began greeting her with warmth. But none of that mattered as much as what happened that evening. In the privacy of the nursery, still unfinished, with soft blankets folded in baskets and a crib yet to be assembled, Isabella stood watching Marcus from the doorway. He was laying out the last of the baby monitors, his movements careful, precise. He didn't know she was watching. "I never asked you why," she said quietly. He turned. "Why what? You stayed. Even when I pushed you away. Even when you could have disappeared." Marcus straightened, his eyes meeting hers. "Because I knew you'd never ask for help, and because I saw the fire in you before you did." She took a step closer. "You could have left that night on Marker's ideas or on Mark's arrangement. You didn't owe me anything." "I did," he said softly. "I owed you the truth, that someone in this house would never betray you." Her throat tightened. "You were never just protecting me, were you?" He shook his head. "I haven't been just your protector for a long time." Silence fell, deep and gentle. Then Isabella crossed the room, closed the distance between them, and for the first time since this battle began, she leaned her forehead against his chest. "I'm tired of choosing between power and love," she whispered. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her like she was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. "Then don't. Choose both." Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the nursery windows. Inside, a war had ended, a woman had claimed her name, and a man had found more than duty. He had found devotion. Together, they had chosen the fight. And they had won. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the Moretti estate, now secured under Isabella's rightful control. News of her cousin's arrest had spread quickly. The conspiracy to usurp the Moretti fortune, one that had endangered Isabella's life and the life of her unborn child, was finally over. For the first time in months, the halls were quiet, no longer echoing with whispered threats or uncertain footsteps. In the east wing, where light poured through towering windows, Isabella lay in a hospital bed set up inside her own home, clutching a small, pink-wrapped bundle. The air was still, except for the soft coo of a newborn and the rhythmic beeping of the nearby monitor. Marcus stood by the bedside, his large, calloused hands trembling as they reached for the baby. "Would you like to hold her?" Isabella whispered. Marcus hesitated, the ever-stoic protector momentarily undone. Then, gently, He cradled the child in his arms. A quiet awe softened his features. "She has your eyes," he said, voice cracking. Isabella's eyes welled with tears. "And your strength." Their daughter, Alessia Rose Moretti Kane, blinked up at him, a perfect, quiet miracle born out of chaos and perseverance. In that fragile moment, Marcus realized he wasn't just a protector anymore. He was a father. 2 weeks later, in the rose garden behind the estate, the air carried the scent of lavender and fresh earth. Isabella and Marcus stood under an archway of climbing jasmine. No guests, no reporters. Just them, a small string quartet in the distance, and Alessia in a white knit dress held by Olivia, who had flown in to visit. The vows they exchanged this time were not cold, calculated words for survival. They were gentle, imperfect promises spoken from two fractured hearts that had stitched themselves together, one act of loyalty at a time. "I married you once out of fear," Isabella said softly, voice trembling. "Today, I marry you out of love, the kind that grows in the quiet, that heals in the darkness, that asks for nothing but gives everything." Marcus took her hands, rough from years of battle and burden. "I never thought I could be enough, but you let me protect something beautiful. You let me protect you. I'm yours, completely." There were no rings exchanged this time. Instead, they each tied a ribbon, one pink, one navy, around each other's wrists. A silent vow, a promise. Months passed. The estate was reborn. The poisonous legacy of manipulation had been uprooted, replaced with the vision Isabella had always dreamed of: hope, healing, and forward movement. In her father's name, Isabella launched the Moretti Legacy Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting widows, orphans, and children born into conflict. Marcus, ever the shadow behind the light, became the foundation's silent patron. His donations came without press releases. His involvement was quiet but constant. His fingerprints were in the logistics, the security, the lives changed behind the scene. He never liked crowds, never liked applause, but he showed up, always. Alessia grew quickly, her tiny laughter echoing in the same corridors that had once felt suffocating. She became the symbol of rebirth, not just for the Moretti family, but for Isabella herself. Watching Marcus carry their daughter through the halls, protect her with the same fierceness he once reserved only for Isabella, showed her the kind of love that didn't need fireworks or grand gestures. It just needed presence. One late spring evening, Isabella stood in the family library, now converted into a reading room for children supported by the foundation. She glanced at a photograph on the mantel. Her father, smiling, unaware of what his legacy would truly become. Behind her, Marcus entered, their daughter perched on his hip. "Dinner's ready," he said, voice low, familiar. Isabella turned, her gaze falling on Alessia's sleepy face. "She loves the garden," Isabella murmured, "just like my mother did. We can take her out for a walk. The air's perfect." They walked outside, hand in hand, along the winding stone path, past fragrant roses, lavish fountains, and the very bench where Isabella had sat, alone and afraid. She was no longer alone, she was loved. She was safe, she was seen. They paused beneath an olive tree, its roots old, its branches wide and full of promise. Marcus shifted Alessia in his arms and looked at Isabella. "You remember what I said? That I had nothing to give?" She nodded. "You were wrong," she whispered. He smiled, small and unguarded. "You gave me everything that mattered." And with that, they walked forward, the three of them, wrapped in twilight and peace, building not just a family, but a legacy born of fire, sealed by love.